What's up, guys? My name's Music Man, and I'm going to be back with another Identity 5 video. And this time, I will be doing my competitive Survivor tier list. The other day, I released a Hunter tier list for Season 31, and you all seem to like that video a lot, so I'm going to do the same thing on the Survivor side. Similar to how the last video went, I have, I have 5 different categories. S tier being kind of the meta survivors, A tier being ones that are great tournament picks. I don't believe they're quite as strong as the survivors that are in S tier, but they are very, very strong survivors to pick in a tournament setting. B tier are for characters that are good tournament picks. Usually these characters are a little bit more situational, but can still be very, very strong survivors if put in 4-team communication. C tier is for characters that are very situational. So these characters might be pulled out if you really need a certain result, or if you're playing on a certain map. Another reason could be is if you're looking to counter certain hunters, and I will go into that momentarily. And last, we have D tier, which are survivors that I don't believe really make sense in any sort of tournament comp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with D, work my way up to S, and here we go. So for the D tier survivors, how I did it was on the right tier would be like the bottom of D tier. On the left side, it would be kind of the top of D tier. And on the bottom, I decided to put the Mind's Eye, which is kind of sad because Mind's Eye is one of those characters that I would call are like a glass cannon character, which they're pretty much all or nothing. Either if the hunter doesn't chase them, then she would be a fantastic survivor. The one way that she can be useful is you can sometimes force the hunter to chase in suboptimal areas, but in a tournament setting, she ends up just being too fragile to get very much out of her. In addition to this, she vaults slowly, and she throws down pallets slow, so when you have a meta of characters like Gamekeeper, Opera Singer, Bloody Queen, basically characters that are super, super mobile, pretty fast, Mind's Eye just does not have enough defensive capabilities to deal with that. So that's why I put her at the bottom of D tier. Now next, I decided to put Puppeteer. Puppeteer is one of those survivors that he's not like totally bad of a survivor, but just in this meta, he just doesn't seem to work too well. Being that in order to use his ability, he has to self-induce a chip hit is something that can be very punishing. In addition to this, I believe that his ability also doesn't defend against certain kinds of abilities like sculptor statues, bombs, stuff like that. So he's just not a character that is able to keep up with the type of meta. If he's picked in a tournament, hunters will easily be able to pick other hunters to compensate for him. And then, yeah, so that's Puppeteer. I will say Puppeteer is somewhat decent against characters like Dreamwitch, or characters that are like single hit hunters. So yeah, characters like your Dreamwitch, I could see him potentially being used quite a bit if there's like a Geisha in a matchup. If he's up against those kinds of hunters, it's great, but in this meta, there's just too much that other survivors can do without as much setback. So up next, this is kind of a guess that I have, but yeah, because this character hasn't been confirmed in tournament, but I also put the Fire Investigator down here, which makes me really sad. He's the new survivor that just released, and he has 2 of the kind of bouncy balls that he's able to throw out. Now, I believe that this character does have a lot of potential, but with the fact that he only has 2 of them and he only gets really so much out of them, I mean, survivors or hunters, all they have to do is swing at them and they disappear. In addition to this, when you throw out the ball, they can't be used immediately. There's like a short cooldown before you can use them, so it makes it very difficult to kite with them unless you have them completely set up. But as far as setup characters go, Fire Investigator is just not quite as strong of a setup character as Female Dancer, which is what I feel like Fire Investigator was kind of going for to be a substitute for, and I just don't think that Fire Investigator has nearly enough compared to Female Dancer to put him above a D tier. Now up next we have Composer. Composer is a character that makes me really sad to put down here. I really wish I could put him higher, but just in a competitive setting, He's once again a very, very fragile survivor. It kind of runs into somewhat similar issues to Mind Type, although to uh, less quite of an extent. He does have a transitional potential item, but that only really takes him so far. And there are just characters like Opera Singer, Gamekeeper, where his ability does not help him very often. In addition to this, it also takes a lot of focus to be able to actually hit all of the calibrations he has to do and keep track of the rest of the match. So this is why I put Composer down there. And then lastly, the strongest of all the D tier survivors I put down here, I also put Doctor. Now, Doctor is one of those characters that I will say does have one very good matchup in competitive, and that's going to be Dream Witch. Oh, and Doctor can also be used against Mad Eyes, but that's also a bit more rare to see in competitive. But Dream Witch is kind of the main one, just because of the fact that she's able to heal up so quickly. I don't believe that her buff is going to really help her all too much, except for maybe a little bit against Chip Hunters, but again, Chip Hunters are still going to not be impacted too much. Her buff will not really affect how she works against single hit hunters like at all, because of the fact that you need to actually get a full like half heal before you do that. And like the issue with that was never that the progress was getting interrupted. That was the thing for chip hunters, but for base hit hunters, Doctor is still going to be kind of down in D tier, with the exception of Dream Witch. If it's Dream Witch, that's actually kind of like a +1 matchup for Doctor, I would say, something around there. So Doctor is very strong against Dream Witch, so if you know you're going against a Dream Witch or a Mad Eyes, you can use Doctor, but other than that, Doctor does not have a very secure spot in this meta. Now, up next we have C tier, which are characters that are very, very situational, I believe. And at the bottom of this tier, I put Little Girl. Little Girl was one of the characters that I thought about putting between D tier or C tier, but she does have some uses. If a team needs to go get a 4K against very specific characters. With 4-man VC, Little Girl is actually very, very strong against Dream Witch. Again, that's kind of like her main counter matchup, but she's able to, if she gets hit early, if you have a really good solo kiter on Little Girl, if she gets early, she can also leech onto a rescuer, and then suddenly the hunter has to chase the Little Girl on a rescue character. It's something that can be difficult for the hunter, but again, Little Girl is a bit too much of a risky pick to really use securely or consistently in a tournament setting. I will say Little Girl probably does best on a map like Moonlit, where you can use Coaster and the teleport ability can be very, very effective on that map. So up next we have Weeping Clown. Weeping Clown is a character that has a very strong transitional potential. The one thing that kind of mainly sets him back is that sometimes he can actually be kind of interrupted and hit out of his ability. There are a lot of characters like Opera Singer that can almost straight up catch back up to him, but he is one of those characters that can be very nice when kiting out in the open. So Weeping Clown can be strong in the right hands, but I believe as far as transitional characters goes, Weepy just does not have enough to offer compared to what the other transitional characters that we will be getting to have. So this is why I put the Weepy down to the C tier. Very situational. You really are only going to use this if you're seeking a win in like a third round. Like a lot of the main other transitional characters have already been banned or used up in global bans. So this is why I put him down here. Up next, I have Postman. Postman is one of those characters that actually used to be very, very strong. I believe about the time that Breaking Wheel was meta. He does have some letters that can be very, very helpful for the survivors. And the main thing that makes him good is the letters, especially like the decode one can be very, very nice at times. But the reason why I put him down here is he's actually relatively a fragile character in this meta. If he's found early and in an exposed area, he can go down quite quickly. He does have the dog, but against a lot of hunters, the dog doesn't actually offer too much protection. If you're thinking of characters like Ivy, like Sangria, even BQ at times, Postman can sometimes be a very exposed survivor to go for. Now, up next, I decided to put Enchantress. And I believe that there are two main characters that you would want to use Enchantress against, and those characters are going to be Mad Eyes. She's actually one of the main counters for Mad Eyes. And she's also used if you need a win against a Night Watch. Enchantress is one of those characters that doesn't have any abilities to start off, which actually makes him quite weak. However, um, if Enchantress can actually last past the early game with the ability of being able to gain stacks whenever teammates that she's healed have been injured, in addition to just building up stacks, if she ends up getting the first kite and actually gets like a good 60 seconds of kiting in, she has the potential to become a scary survivor. But against most hunters, I mean, we're talking about our opera singer, our gamekeeper, even against characters like Bonbon and Sculptor, Enchantress a lot of times can just be too exposed in the early game to get a whole lot out of her. And I believe, once again, that there are just stronger characters than her that can do very similar things, so this is why I put her down in C tier. Up next, we have Professor. Once again, another character that you play a lot if you're looking to target a Mad Eyes. However, the main thing that makes Professor pretty decent is the fact that he can drop down scales as an assist. That would be the main thing to use him for in a team setup. A lot of times, though, his assist is not as useful as kind of the other characters' assistance, and especially against certain characters, namely Night Watch. I'm thinking can also be somewhat, not so much Hermit, but like Night Watch is kind of the big one that I'm thinking of. His ability can be useful, but there's too many hunters that are quite solid against his ability to really make it work. And the next two characters I'm probably going to explain together, because if you use one, you really most of the time have to use the other. And these two characters are Mechanic and Prisoner. They were meta together, like rank meta, a few seasons ago, because if you end up downing Mechanic early and she gets her bot out, a lot of times Decoding would be able to compensate. And same thing with a Prisoner. If you get Prisoner down early, then Mechanic can still Cypher Rush to a tie. These two characters are used most frequently if you're looking to get a tie. Mechanic, of course, being a survivor that if the main body goes down, you're not really losing a survivor on a Cypher because the bot can decode at the same time. In addition to this, Prisoner can also get a lot of decoding done in the same spot on the map. And a lot of times when a rescuer has to leave for a rescue, Prisoner can connect and pick up that Cypher without actually leaving to go for it, which can make Prisoner very strong at times. But the reason why they're down here is that I believe both survivors are a little bit of desperation picks. They are very, very risky. They are relatively fragile, especially compared to the other characters in this meta. And in this meta, decoders just typically are not necessary because there are a lot of characters that have a lot of defensive abilities that don't require them to have like as good decoding to compensate. So in this meta, it's all about like lasting longer than it is about just Cypher rushing to a tie. But they can be used in tandem for a decent round 3 option. Up next, I decided to put Cowboy. Cowboy is actually here very situational because he's actually very, very good against characters that your main form of kiting is transitional kiting. Down here, Cowboy is typically more used for a kiting setup. Against characters like Fool's Gold, like Bonbon, even a little bit to BQ in some circumstances, Cowboy can be a very strong transitional kiter. His rescue ability is not the best, at least not as good as... harassment ability. His harassment ability is not quite as good as some of the characters that I placed above him. However, Cowboy can be, once again, a solid round 3 pick, which is where a lot of the C tier survivors are kind of like round 3 options. Up next, I put Thief. Now, Thief was kind of one of these characters that's tough to put on here because there are a few circumstances where Thief can actually be a solid like B or even A tier survivor in some circumstances. And this is basically, Thief is pretty much just good on Ever Sleeping, I would say. some cases Moonlit, but mostly Eversleeping is the one place where you're going to want to use Thief. And you're going to want to put Thief in kind of Graveyard where you can have all these flashlight setups. In addition to that, Thief is one of those characters that is very good against some hunters, but weak against others. A lot of times in competitive, at the competitive scene, Thief can be used against Sangria as a bit of like a harassment assist type thing. Thief is incredible against Mad Eyes, which is really difficult because he's able to harass Mad Eyes from getting off of his cipher without really risking a whole lot because he doesn't have to get too close, and being that he has the silence ability, that's able to pull him off of his console without exposing him too much. So this is why I put Thief right here. Against certain hunters, Thief can be very good. The reason why Thief can't go above is because Thief really dies to essentially Gamekeeper. Gamekeeper and Ivy both, I would say, are very strong counters to Thief. So if the hunter has a wide pool of hunters, Thief a lot of times can very much struggle against those characters. Up next, I put Journalist at the top of C tier. The reason why I put her here is not because she's not a great survivor, it's just that the other rescuers pretty much do similar things for better. The one thing that Journalist has that's really nice is that she's able to pretty much guarantee a rescue against single hit hunters. But once again, Journalist is one of those rescue characters that sometimes can be more exposed at the kiting stage of the game. She's actually chaseable for a lot of hunters, which can be very rough on her at times. And so that's C tier. Moving on, we're going to go ahead and look at the B tier survivors. So these are survivors that I would say are a lot of times actually quite solid in tournament. A lot of times I feel like they don't offer as much as the characters that I would put above her, but there are a lot of reasons why these characters can be used even in like round 1, round 2 of a tournament. And at the bottom of this tier, I decided to put Magician. Magician is one of those characters that did get a buff like a while ago that ended up making quite solid, being that he has his wands. It actually makes him somewhat decent against characters like Sangria, but a lot of times Magician just does not get as much value, and it's not really much more than kind of like a kiting character. He doesn't have a lot of ways that he's able to assist, so this is kind of why I put Magician down here. Prospector is a quite solid survivor against certain hunters, namely if you know you're going to be going up against a Sculptor. Prospector is used a lot. The Night Watch, he can also be decent. He's one of those characters that can have, he's a pretty decent choice to put as a first kiter on in a competitive setting on maps like Lakeside. He's very solid on Hospital. There are a few cases where Prospector is very, very good at maps. I know Japan likes to play him a lot on Eversleeping because there are a few placements where you can actually magnet people up into the corner house 2-story through the side of the thing, which can be very, very powerful in certain settings. So Prospector, I believe, very comfortably fits in B tier. Not quite as strong to go against kind of characters towards the top of the hunter meta, but can be a very strong survivor to go for. Up next, I have Painter. Painter is, once again, like Enchantress, one of those characters that can be very, very exposed in the early game, but ends up growing more powerful throughout a match. So, for those of you that don't know, Painter does have an ability where he has to look at the hunter for a little bit and is able to get his paintings. I believe Painter would be a lot better if he could just start painting his paintings at the beginning of the match. But until he ends up actually seeing the hunter, he's pretty much a base survivor, which is something that can sometimes be a weakness at certain times. But Painter, when he does get his ability down, it can be very solid, both for kiting and for assisting other survivors, especially off rescues. Up next, I have Entomologist. Entomologist is, once again, another very, I would say, map-dependent character. I would say her best map to use on is probably going to be Sacred Heart Hospital, because you can put the bees in at the entrances of the hospital. It can really help and harass the hunter a lot. Other than that, she doesn't get too much use, especially with characters as prevalent as Sangria, and also Ento can be somewhat weak to Gamekeeper at times, although Ento is sometimes a counter to Gamekeeper. It's just kind of all about how it goes. The bees sometimes are able to block the hooks, but other times the bees end up actually just being another wall for the Gamekeeper to hook onto. So this is why Entomologist is kind of at B tier right now. Up next, I have Batter. Batter is one of those characters that I believe is B tier now, but after his nerf, he might drop a little bit. But Batter is one of those characters that's very, very strong, kind of at a round 3 kind of setup. And so he's one of those characters, he can be a harasser, but a lot of times he's able to be used a lot as an assist. The same way kind of Forward used to be, but Batter is just very, very strong in that he basically gets unlimited abilities as long as the hunter doesn't break his balls when he uses them. So this is why I put Batter here in B tier. He's also quite a solid kiter against certain hunters as well. Up next, we have Explorer. Explorer is another one of those characters that I would say can be an all or nothing survivor. It all depends on whether the hunter is able to spot them out in the early game. I would say his strongest map is by far Leo's Memory, because there are a lot of spots for Explorer to hide where he quite literally has no pixels visible to the hunter. If he's able to hide in the snowbanks, he can be a very, very strong survivor in the early game. The only thing is that if he gets spotted out early, the hunter a lot of times is going to be able to down the Explorer quite quickly. But he's also can be quite solid against hunters that rely a lot on pressure against the last cipher, because of the fact that he's able to just build up 100 pages and then use that all on the last cipher. Up next, we have Forward. Forward is one of those characters that used to be really high in the meta, but has since kind of been replaced specifically by Antiquarian, is the way that I've been kind of interpreting it. Forward is still a very, very strong survivor. The thing holding him back right now is that he does have very slow decoding. So Forward is still a very solid pick if you need to shoot for a win, because of the fact that his harassment ability can be really game-changing, especially around the last cipher. But with hunters as strong as they are, if they go against a Forward, a lot of times the hunter does have the leeway to bring excitement in their build, and that kind of counters Forward's entire, especially for the decoding debuff that he ends up getting. Now, Lucky Guy is one of the characters that's very tough to actually put on a tier list like this, because he has very specific reasons why he's good for competitive. A lot of people might be surprised I didn't put Lucky Guy way lower, but Lucky Guy a lot of times is used as a round 1 pick against Sangria, and the reasons being are that if he ends up getting all of his luck, he can be kind of a menace to the hunter, but there's also a double-edged sword there where if he ends up getting like his first pull as a syringe, he does have the potential of getting a lot of bad luck in a match. But against Sangria, a lot of times you're going all or nothing. So Lucky Guy, I would believe, kind of fits in B tier here. I believe he'll drop down a lot once Ivy is added to competitive, though, just because Ivy will eat up a character like Lucky Guy in the early game. But the way he stands right now, he can be a very strong character to lock in either first or second during your round 1 to eat up a global ban, is essentially why he's used. Up next, we have Gravekeeper. Gravekeeper is a very solid rescuer. I would just say the only thing holding him back is that there are other characters that do his ability but better, essentially. Gravekeeper digs down. He did recently get some buffs that made him not die quite as much to some chip hunters. However, Gravekeeper is one of those characters that can be very chaseable for characters like Sangria, just because once he gets kind of the one hit. Also, he's very weak to Gamekeeper because his hook is able to pull Gravekeeper out of Shovel for nothing, and a lot of times that can lead to a follow-up hit, which pretty much negates his whole ability. So I believe that there are characters that just deal with that better than Gravekeeper can, but he can still be a very solid survivor against 2 hunters specifically. Those are Breaking Wheel and Dream Witch, because Gravekeeper is able to dig underground and completely ignore the patrollers, and in addition to that, Gravekeeper can also dig down, and when he's underground, he's not susceptible to spikes. The only thing you have to be careful about is that he still can be snapped with the Presence 1 ability underground, so you just gotta be careful about that when you play Gravekeeper against Wheel. But other than that, he can be a solid rescuer, somewhat consistent, but there are just some counter matchups that make him not quite as strong sometimes for competitive. Up next, I have Perfumer here. Perfumer, I would say, is very strong against certain hunters in this meta, weak against others. Perfumer is a very, very strong matchup against Sangria, just because of the fact that she's able to eat hits and then use the speed boost to transition. It makes her very, very strong. In addition to this, I believe that Perfumer does have potential to be somewhat decent against Ivy, being that Perfumer might be able to perfume off some of the scare that Ivy's able to build up. So in addition to this, she's also very solid against characters like, I would say Naiad is another one that's really good because she can perfume off any damage there. But anyways, yeah, so that's why I put Perfumer at the top of B tier. I believe some people have a debate about whether Perfumer or Magician is better, and I believe at the competitive level, Perfumer can be really strong for competitive, but I can see the arguments for Magician being that if Perfumer does end up getting hit early, a lot of times her ability becomes essentially useless, whereas Magician can use his abilities at health at kind of their fullest extent. The reason why I think Perfumer is better is because she does have a lot of synergy with 2 characters in particular, those being Seer and Cheerleader. Seer is able to, when she's on cooldown for her ability, block 1 hit, and a lot of times that's enough for Perfumer to be able to build up another perfume by then, and Cheerleader can essentially do the same thing by canceling the perfume cooldown. Makes her a very, very strong survivor. And up next, I have A tier survivors. I believe that these survivors are very, very strong tournament picks and actually don't have a ton of counters to them. So at the top of this list, I decided to put Barmaid. Barmaid is a character that is pretty notoriously known for countering Dream Witch, and that's really the main reason why she's used in competitive. She is one of those characters that can be used against Dream Witch, but if a hunter ends up being faced up against Barmaid, there aren't a ton of characters that counter her ability. If you don't want to put her as Kiter, like say you're up against a Bonbon or a Sculptor, like some sort of chip hunter, which is typically what Barmaid ends up being a little bit weaker to, her ability still can be very strong for healing up rescuers if they have taken a hit off the rescue. So this is why I believe Barmaid is a very strong tournament pick. Up next, I have Embalmer here. Embalmer is one of those characters, he's very, very strong on big maps and is very good if you want him to be a first chase. So basically what you can do is you can have him place his coffin right away when he spawns, and when he kites, hopefully he's able to get a pretty decent kite. And off the first rescue, a lot of times he can use the coffin and resurrect himself and essentially get a lot of free kiting time for basically the thing that makes him really good is that he can rescue himself without needing a rescuer to eat some damage or anything, which allows the Cypher Rush to go very fast, essentially guaranteed. There are also instances where he can place the coffin down at the gate and assist a teammate in the late game, and there are a lot of cases where if you coffin just right and there are no ciphers around, a lot of times the hunter can lose a target, or at the very least, if there is a cipher around, a lot of times you can actually bait out a trump card, in a similar way that Priestess can with World Portal. Up next, we have Cheerleader. Now, Cheerleader is one of those survivors that I believe, as she stands right now, is going to be a great tournament pick, but I do believe that with her upcoming nerf that's supposed to be happening, I believe that has potential to knock her down quite a bit on this tier list. So the reason why Cheerleader's up here is that she gets 2 cheers right away at the beginning of the game, which make her a fantastic kiting character. If you're able to close the distance really fast, you're able to get to pallets and time it correctly. Cheerleader can be very, very scary in the early game. In addition to this, Cheerleader does have a lot of synergy with other characters on this tier list by being able to cancel their cooldowns, which can be very, very nice for characters like Perfumer. Perfumer is the big one, but some other characters that I'm thinking about. Oh, Acrobat too. Acrobat is basically the other big one that Cheerleader can help out. And up next is Novelist. Novelist is, again, quite a difficult character to put on a tier list like this because he's just recently kind of started to be used in competitive, and I'd be really interested in seeing if there are other hunters that kind of figure out ways to deal with him. But Novelist is very, very strong against a lot of hunters, and is actually quite solid against Opera Singer at times. Novelist can also be very strong against Dream Witch if you really know how to kite with him. Novelist is one of those characters, of course, that's able to switch the hunter and the survivor placement, and this can be very impactful, especially against characters like Naiad or Bloody Queen that rely a lot on being on specific sides of the ability for the survivor, and the fact that the Novelist is able to undo that makes it a very, very strong pick if you're ending up being able to get him at like a round 2, round 3 setting. But I believe he also has potential to be very great round 1, so this is why I put Novelist where he's at. Now up next I have Female Dancer. Female Dancer is, I would say, pretty much the second best setup character in the game, probably second to Toy Merchant. And I would say Female Dancer is very, very good because in specific maps, the big ones are probably Moonlit and Eversleeping. She's able to place boxes in specific areas that are able to help teammates kite without pulling her off of the cipher for too long. In addition to this, with the slow boxes, the hunters have to take a lot of time to actually break down the ability, which survivors can use that time to transition. And this makes Female Dancer a very, very strong character. In addition to this, there are a lot of instances where she has a lot of synergy with other characters, being able to pick up their items and kite for a long time on her own. So up next, I have Coordinator. Coordinator is basically the go-to round 1 rescuer. Because of the fact that she gets a gun, she gets a guaranteed stun pretty much. The only thing you have to be careful about is shooting a wall, but again, if you're playing Coordinator in competitive, that should not be happening too much. A lot of times she acts as excitement bait for hunters, so a lot of hunters, when they go against a Coordinator, they'll use excitement, and a lot of Coordinators are prepared for this. If they end up getting the first kite, they end up shooting very, very early, which ends up faring very well for a Coordinator. So she's overall a very solid rescue to go to. In addition to this, she doesn't actually get a decode debuff until someone's on chair. So if someone kites for like 3 ciphers, I mean, essentially, Coordinator will not have to deal with too much decoding after that in most cases. So Coordinator is a very, very solid rescuer to go for round 1 if she's not banned. Up next, I have Lawyer. Lawyer is, I would say, the strongest decoder in the game. He did get a buff which allows him to have all these passive benefits as he just does basic interactions without the game, such as running around, vaulting windows, and the big one is the decoding buff. The decoding buff ends up making decode so fast, especially in kind of the late game as you combine that with accelerated decoding. In 4-man VC, Lawyer is actually very strong because he gets that map and he's able to call out the rotations live time, which makes him very, very consistent. So I would say Lawyer is a very solid survivor to go for competitive, but I have heard rumors that he will get nerfed in the future, so we'll just have to see what that entails. Up next, I decided to put Wildling. This may be slightly controversial, and I may be slightly biased because this is the survivor that I main. Wildling is a very solid hunter on maps, on large maps particularly. Moonlit, Eversleeping, I would say Lakeside's another good one. Even Chinatown can be sometimes. Wildling gets his boar in the early game, which makes him basically unchaseable for everybody except for Gamekeeper and Breaking Wheel. Against those characters, I would say Wildling is probably B or C tier, just because there are other rescuers that can deal with those two hunters specifically better. However, what makes Wildling strong is that he's able to get on his boar, and with the speed boost, he's able to traverse large maps very quickly to get himself prepared for rescues quickly. In addition to this, he's basically free kiting if the hunter even decides to look at him to chase. So in addition to this, Wildling is pretty much guaranteed to have an ability for the late game, being that it's just a 30-second cooldown if he doesn't get hit off his boar. It is 60 seconds if he does get hit off his boar, but top Wildling should not get hit off very much. In addition to this, even though it's very tough to land, he does have a harassment ability, which can stall a little bit more time if you're looking for a little bit more time to prime a Cypher. So I believe that Wildling is a very strong tournament pick, and is actually really good at kiting in the open, which is very important for character if you're going against characters like Opera. Up next, past Wildling, I put Gardener. Gardener is a very, very solid survivor right now. She does get her early bubble, which allows her to kite usually for like 3 ciphers if the hunter wants to commit to her in the early game. Exceptions being if it's a Sangria, a lot of times that there are times where that's just not possible, but then again, that goes for pretty much any character on the roster. Gardener is very, very strong in competitive because of the fact that she's able to get free rescues when she's injured, which can be very impactful in the late game, being that she can summon her bubble. And another important thing to note is that if she stands still and ends up getting interrupted out of the cooldown, the progress bar actually saves so she can get some instant bubbles off in some situations. So Gardener is a very, very strong kiting character, and a lot of times can actually be a very solid rescuer as well. So this is why I put Gardener in A tier. Up next, I put Acrobat. Acrobat is pretty notoriously known for having some pretty broken spots, and I would say Moonlit is kind of the big one. Acrobat is able to farms his ability so many times, getting up to 6 balls throughout the course of a match. Of course, the red ball being rechargeable upon chasing the hunter, or kiting the hunter, and the mud ball being able to be redeemed by getting a rescue, and the white ball being redeemed by getting so much decoding progress. He has so many abilities that a lot of times he'll have plenty to go around in the late game, and yeah, he doesn't really get too bad of a debuff, just slower exegate decoding, which can be impactful sometimes, but a lot of times it doesn't make too much of a difference. Acrobat is a very, very solid survivor to put at 4-stop and Moonlit, and can occupy a lot of time in the early game, so that's why I put him at A tier. I do believe that Aeroplanist and Patient can do a little bit of a better job. However, Acrobat is still, I would say, a solid 3rd pick for 4-stop. Now, that's it for A tier. Now I'm going to move up to S tier. S tier survivors are ones that are very, very solid, and you will be seeing a lot if you watch enough competitive. And I would say at the bottom of this tier, I would put Toy Merchant. Toy Merchant is one of those characters that has very, very strong setups on the 2 main maps she's used on are Eversleeping and Chinatown. In Chinatown, she does have some broken spots that can put the survivor onto the balcony at hotel, and in Eversleeping, there are a lot of cases where she can set up catapults to get into the 2 stories. A lot of times she can make it so that if a hunter is chasing them, chasing a survivor, they can reach one of these catapults and just kind of passively assist, and can a lot of times completely destroy any chase potential that the hunter has. The only thing is that Toy Merchant can sometimes break down against Sangria, but I will say against most other hunters in the roster, she is a very, very strong assist character. So up next, I decided to put Patient. Patient is a very, very strong survivor to go for. He does have a lot of hooks at Moonlit 4-stop, but he's a character that's honestly not super map dependent. He does have maps that are stronger than others, but he is very playable at the competitive level any round of the game, and Patient is probably the go-to transitional character at the moment. Don't mind the background. My brother is doing some woodworking right now, so I'll try to talk over that in the time being. Up next, I decided to put First Officer. First Officer, I would say, is one of the two best rescuers in the game, First Officer and Mercenary. First Officer is very good because of the fact that he's practically unchaseable for most hunters. He's very strong against Sangria because the Sangria a lot of times will not be able to chase First Officer. But overall, yeah, he's a very strong rescuer. He's very tough to stuff. A good First Officer will never get stuffed because of the fact that if he gets double hit from his ability, he essentially gets Tide Turner for 5 seconds, so he's pretty much a guaranteed rescuer, even if you end up getting double hit in the process. So, yeah, First Officer is one of the two main go-to rescuers in this meta. Now, up next, I have Antiquarian. Antiquarian is arguably one of the best assist characters in this game. She's very, very strong to both Gamekeeper and Sangria, which is very important the way the meta stands right now. And she also has some potential to go up against Ivy if put in the right hands. Antiquarian has an ability where if she hits the hunter into a wall, they will no longer be able to swing for the next 4 seconds, which makes her very strong against characters like Ivy. There are many cases where she's actually strong against Sangria, Gamekeeper, or Wax Artist. There are just so many instances where Antiquarian is very, very strong, and why you'll see her banned a lot during round 1s. Up next, I decided to put Aeroplanist. I believe Aeroplanist is slightly better than Patient and Acrobat, although you'll hear people that would kind of argue for the other two survivors at the same time. Aeroplanist, I would argue, is very, very strong because he's not a super map-dependent character. He gets he gets his jetpacks, and he gets kind of the vaulting jetpack at pretty much no downside. He gets, I believe it's a 2% decoding debuff, which is practically nothing in this meta. And he's basically unchaseable in the early game against most hunters. And he's basically used a lot as a rescue character if you don't want to run First Officer or Mercenary, or if you want multiple tides, he's a solid option to carry Tide in the comp. So Aeroplanist is very, very strong. Up next, I decided to put Psychologist. Psychologist has a lot of abilities that she's able to get passively. Of course, she's able to get the free third hit that she's able to get with the stress, which makes her very, very strong against characters like Dream Witch or other single hit characters that will need to build up for a third attack when normal survivors will be down in 2. In addition to this, she's able to use the whistle to heal up rescuers if they eat 1 hit, which can be very, very strong. And yeah, so next I have Seer. Seer is, I would argue, either the second or first best assist character. You can kind of flip-flop where Priestess and Seer are at on this tier list. It's really a matter of preference. Seer is able to take 1 hit from any character at any point, and it's also rebuildable. So against certain hunters, that can sometimes be very good. He's also quite solid kiter. You won't see him used very much against Sangria. However, against pretty much any other character on the roster, he is definitely an S tier survivor, despite him getting nerfs. His nerfs don't impact him all too much because all they do is impact the duration of the owl, which a lot of times never ended up being his issue at all because most owls end up coming out as instant owls anyways. So up next, I decided to put Priestess. I believe personally that Priestess is the best assist character in the game. There are a lot of maps where she has so much potential in, namely Moonlit is the big one. She's very strong on Eversleeping, very strong on Chinatown. The global portal can be very, very strong on Lakeside. And she has so much that she can do. She can place assist portals for the survivors. She's also a decent kiter herself. And a lot of times, the main thing that ends up impacting the hunter's match is if a survivor is able to ride out a Tide Turner to get to the global portal. A lot of times that will force out a warp teleport or force out a trump card to switch to one of those traits in order to catch up to whatever survivor they were chasing beforehand. So Priestess can be very strong. She has very good synergy with other characters, and so this is why I put her at S tier. And the last survivor I put on this tier list, I personally believe that this might be the strongest character in the game, and that is going to be Mercenary. Mercenary does have a passive ability that basically makes him a guaranteed rescuer. He also gets 3 elbow pads. He does have a decode debuff, and his ability has been nerfed. But a lot of times it's a toss-up whether you want Mercenary or First Officer. But yeah, Mercenary is one of the most used characters in competitive right now, and really has been ever since he got his passive ability. So Mercenary is a very, very strong survivor to go for, and I believe is the best character in the game. And so yeah, that's my tier list. If you guys enjoyed watching this tier list, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And if you guys want other tier lists, feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you disagree with where I put some survivors, feel free to let me know in the comments too. I will be willing to respond to any of those comments as I see them. And yeah, thank you all for watching my tier list video for Season 31 Competitive Survivors.